One fall weekend in Yama no Susume, shy Aoi Yukimura goes to the city with her classmates, while outgoing Hinata Kuraue spends the day mostly alone. Best friends Aoi and Hinata have been going through a weird rough patch recently. Nothing has happened between them, but they've been awkward and accidentally distant. Today's subject, Season 3, Episode 10, isn't the peak of their unease, but it places their discord front and center. As the two go their separate ways for the day, Aoi's strengthening bonds and Hinata's lonely soul-searching are made to feel more personal and impactful by impressive storyboarding throughout the episode. And for that, we have to thank the animator China, who directed and storyboarded this episode. Here, China uses 3 visual patterns, or motifs, to help the audience empathize with Hinata's unsure feelings and be proud of Aoi's growing friendships. Today, I'll generally step through the episode, point out these 3 motifs, and tie them back into the themes and narrative that they support. We begin on Aoi and Hinata and their friends planning a trip to Ikebukuro. Hinata can't join them. She already has family plans. Aoi, when asked, is initially hesitant, but after imagining Hinata's teasing, surprisingly, yet firmly announces she's going. Backing up a bit, the first frames of this scene demonstrate the first standout motif of this episode. We open on students playing soccer in the foreground. After they run off screen, the focus slides to the background where our subjects have already begun their conversation. One shot with 2 layers that naturally contextualize each other. Sometimes this practice is used to add simple depth to a scene. The key takeaway, though, is when the separation guides us to contrast the subjects of each layer. The second scene here introduces the second of the 3 motifs. The pattern is framing a character way off to one side, the rest of the frame exposing a great deal of empty space. This episode largely follows Hinata during her day alone, and this framing will constantly evoke feelings of loneliness. Lastly, speaking of following Hinata, throughout the episode, the storytelling often closely follows Hinata's perspective, sometimes literally and sometimes figuratively. For example, here is Hinata's first-person view of Kaide's outfit for the day. Less literally, in Scene 2 here, Aoi isn't fully on screen, perhaps indicating that Hinata's perspective doesn't fully see her either. Seeing a character's perspective makes these scenes more personal and the audience more empathetic. Examples of these motifs show up as early as the end of this very scene. After Hinata and Aoi awkwardly part ways for the weekend, Aoi runs home, and all 3 of these motifs pop up once more. First, contrasting layers. Aoi, running out of frame, highlights the great distance between her in the foreground and Hinata left behind in the background. As she leaves, Hinata can't, and therefore the audience can't, glimpse her face, masking Aoi's feelings from us. We observe Hinata's perspective. And finally, lonely framing. As the scene closes on Hinata alone, hardly even on screen, telling herself in vain, "It's fine." Now that we know what to look for, these patterns will start popping up all over the rest of the episode. Let's start with Hinata's day. Hinata wakes up on Saturday to learn that actually her family movie is on Sunday. She considers trying to catch up with the others, but after imagining Aoi's teasing, decides not to. The scene opens on the souvenir Hinata got for Aoi on her own Ikebukuro trip. She hasn't yet found the time to deliver the gift. It's a poignant reminder of their friendship, the rockiness they're going through, and today's unfortunate circumstances all at once. As Hinata goes through her morning routine, notice how often objects are caught in the foreground of the shot. The stairs and cup and light don't offer any deep narrative significance, but they create eye-catching layouts and help us conjure a more complete image of the setting of this conversation. So, with everyone apparently busy, Hinata begins wandering aimlessly around town. Remember again the motifs we're looking for. Hinata, Aoi, and Coconut have sat here tons of times before. So now, framing Hinata so far on the right makes the empty ledge seats behind her really stand out. Next, I want to appreciate this set of transitions here. Following the common thread will naturally guide us from cut to cut. Hinata looks up and comments on the nice weather. So, when we see the leaves and clouds, we naturally infer that we're seeing what Hinata sees, her perspective. A leaf breaks off. A stone hits the leaf. We see who threw the stone, and now, from behind the family, we can again see Hinata in the distance. Remembering the contrasting layers, foreground, happy, fun-having family naturally contrasts with solitary background Hinata. And finally returning to her, the framing motif again enhances her loneliness, even if Hinata hasn't admitted anything to herself yet. Luckily, Kaide comes to save the day a little bit. Here's two more examples of following Hinata's perspective. First, the camera doesn't even show us Yuka, somebody that Hinata doesn't know, until she's introduced. And second, cued by a close-up of Hinata's eyes turning towards Kaide, Hinata takes in Kaide's outfit for the day, and we can again infer this shot is basically a first-person view. At Kaide's place, the three get to talking about opposites going well together. Kaide and Yuka's differences are in plain view, supported by a fun shot putting each of them over one of the snacks. Comparisons to Aoi are more implicit. Hinata likens Yuka to a teacher, like Aoi did, and the picture frame naturally reminds us of when Aoi had come over as well. In ways like these, we recall both how different Aoi and Hinata are, but also how much they are of the same mind. After this conversation, Hinata only has more to think about. Reminder, nothing between her and Aoi is resolved this episode. It's much more contemplative for the moment. Jumping over to Ikebukuro, apparently Aoi did not like the VR. I like this moment here a lot. I think Aoi from a couple seasons ago would have just quietly accepted and bottled up her experience. But with Yuri and Mio and Kasumi, she feels comfortable enough to share how uncomfortable she was in the VR, outright disagreeing with them about how scary it was. That's huge progress for Aoi, and there's even more to come. Interestingly, right now Aoi is being more open with these three than she and Hinata are with each other. Twice this episode, the two have made snap decisions based on how they imagine the other teasing them. This dreamt-up teasing isn't new to the series at all, but I think it stands out in this episode because of scenes like this, where Aoi is talking and disagreeing and laughing with these three like it's nothing. Earlier I said Aoi was partially off-screen because Hinata didn't fully see her. Same thing. The two just aren't on the same page right now. On the train home at the end of the day, Aoi and the girls spot Mount Fuji in the distance. Aoi admits that she only got halfway up, but the others insist that's amazing as well. Kasumi then vocalizes what the audience perhaps has been thinking for a while now. Aoi has become much brighter and easier to talk to, she says. Kasumi asks if the mountain climbing made Aoi less indoorsy and timid. And perhaps it did, but I think we all know the answer has much more to do with the friends and relationships Aoi made in that time. And now, here, she's made one more. And so, at the end of the day, Hinata finds herself near the station the other girls are just arriving at. Both the layer and framing motifs show up in force, with Hinata alone on the left and a pair of unknown girls on the right. This contrast becomes even more upsetting when Hinata sees the girls chatting about the trip, and she can't bring herself to speak out. Hinata does spot that Aoi got a souvenir, the same one Hinata got for her. We, the audience, knew earlier Aoi had bought a gift, but we didn't learn what it was until we saw it from Hinata's perspective. This shot of them walking away is reminiscent of Aoi running off at the beginning of the episode, both times leaving Hinata behind. The distance between them feels the greatest it's ever been. The final minutes of this episode offer little comfort. Hinata is still in her own head, unable to sort out her feelings. We see the souvenir Hinata bought once more. Same shot as earlier, but this time, much gloomier. And that's the episode. Like I said before, resolution will come in the future. This isn't even the low point for Hinata. It's just the episode where her and Aoi's conflict, for lack of a better term, becomes most apparent. Honestly, I didn't even have time to get into all of the incredible animation this episode, or the different lighting in their days, or even all of the fun storyboarding throughout. But hopefully, I've been able to point out how the framing and layers and perspective all support this episode's narrative and emotional beats. The juxtaposition of Aoi's really good day and Hinata's solitary wandering makes this conflict feel especially personal and relatable. For all these reasons and more, this episode has always been a favorite of mine, and hopefully I've been able to impart some of that to you as well.